So if we fast forward a little bit from there, when you got to the United Nations, you were in the anti-trafficking world, and you said that you noticed a gap in the engagement with the private sector in their anti-trafficking efforts. I think you said it was not because they didn't want to, but because they feared about being named or shamed for approaching a UN official to ask for help. So tell us how that looked. Like, was there what was causing their sense of shame, and how did it manifest in these businesses?
I'll go back a little bit more and provide a little bit more context to make it more clear. So, back around 15 years ago, the statistics related to human trafficking were getting better. At that time, the number of people estimated to be in modern slavery was about 21 million. And so, at the same time, we were getting better statistics that looked at what we, the counter trafficking world, was doing to address this. And the number that included all of the NGOs and the government and United Nations combined in terms of the number of people we were rescuing each year was about 34,000. When you put those two numbers together, it means that the world was only helping 0.2% of the victims. When we at the United Nations came to that conclusion, we were actually quite upset and concerned. We're not having any impact at all. So we went back to the statistics, and out of the statistics, 21 million people in modern slavery, 75% associated with forced labor. But the other statistic was that 60% of that was associated with supply chains, with private sector. So we said to ourselves, well, we have to talk to the private sector. So as a UN official, I decided that I was going to start going to Hong Kong. That's where a lot of the regional offices are and captains of industry and so forth. And so I would fly up, and because I'm a UN official, they would agree to a meeting. And I would often kind of sit down with them and have a conversation. And what I found over time was kind of a particular pattern that they would listen to what I had to say. Then they would say, okay, well, we understand the business risk, but we're not going to have a conversation with you because you're coming from that naming and shaming world. You can embarrass us. You can create a situation where our reputation can be tainted by this. And so, as a result of multiple visits there, and because of the fact at that time many of these organizations didn't understand what it was modern slavery was, it was recommended that perhaps what they need is an organization to help them to raise awareness. And so, a number of banks and manufacturing companies and so forth urged us to set something up. And so, I left the United Nations and I set up the Mekong Club in Hong Kong. So the Mekong Club works with the private sector in a positive, supportive, non-naming and shaming way in order to help businesses like banks, like manufacturers, like the hospitality sector, to understand the issue and then to determine the risk factor and the vulnerability that they have. And we do this in a very private, confidential way to allow for banks to be able to address things. So that was one aspect of this. One other thing that I want to mention about this is another thing that often happens. So because I'm a UN official and you prepare for this months in advance and you contact some people and they agree to a meeting, and then when I get there, they're like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this meeting with that UN guy. Oh, I'm really, really busy today. I don't know why I agreed to this. Okay, have him come in. So I'd come in and I'd sit down, and this was back when Blackberries were in place, and the guy would say, well, I'm really busy today, and he's on his Blackberry saying, I only have 15 minutes of time, and I'm sorry, it's just the way it is this week. So I'd start talking about cases. I'd talk about forced labor cases. I talk about fishing cases, sex trafficking, and so forth. And interestingly, after about 15 minutes, the Blackberry's on the table. 15 minutes after that, he's leaning forward, listening to what I had to say. 90 minutes later, we're still talking. But some of these people are at this point saying, oh my gosh, I had no idea this was happening. This is terrible. What are we going to do? How do we get involved in this? How do we address this? Because for whatever reason, they hadn't been exposed to it from the human standpoint. And as a result of listening to the cases and recognizing that, addressing anti-money laundering or corruption or anything related to human traffic, that there was a real impact, an impact related to people being hurt as a result of this. And so as a result of that kind of reaction, some of the people from these banks, in fact, were the ones that helped us to set up the Mekong Club. one of the things that I'll just tell a story because I think it'll reflect this. And so a couple of years ago, I was in the United States and I was attending a conference, the American Banking Association conference. I did a big presentation. And afterwards, this guy comes up to me and says, I want to tell you a story. I said, that as public speaker, that happens. And so um, go ahead, tell me what you want to say. He said, well, I was taking my wife and teenage daughter from one part of the United States to another. And we were driving and we got to the halfway point and we pulled into a motel. And I got my wife and daughter settled. And I was going out for food and I saw this 14-year-old girl being dragged into a room. And, it looked like prostitution. And I have a teenage daughter. And so, I was a little bit concerned about that. And so I went to the manager and I said, I think there's a problem here. He then went back to his room and he's peeking out of the window to see if anything would happen. Sure enough, 15 minutes later, the police come. 15 minutes after that, that person's being taken out in handcuffs. The girl's being taken to an unmarked car, presumably to a shelter. And he said, I wanted to tell you that because I felt so proud of myself. This is a milestone in my life. So I looked at this guy and I said to him, like, what do you do? He says, I'm a banker. And I said, yeah, you're a banking conference. What do you do? He says, I do anti-money laundering, and we look at the, client base, and we try to, identify where there's risk and so forth. We do suspicious transaction reports, et cetera. I asked him, well, do you ever run human trafficking cases? Oh, yeah, we do that. And I said, dude, don't you realize that you've been doing this work all along? You may not see the outcome of what happens when you get that suspicious transaction report. Maybe it's exactly what you saw that day. Doors being kicked down, people being helped, and so forth. You are a hero. Did you not realize that? And so it took him a couple of minutes, and then he had that aha moment. Oh, yeah, what we do means something. It makes sense. It adds value to what it is. We're not only protecting the company, but we're also helping people. Thank you for that insight. So a couple of months later, I'm in Singapore and I'm on stage and I do a big presentation and I tell the audience, 650 people, mostly compliance people, this story. And I said, you guys are all heroes. Do you realize that by helping your company, you're helping the world to be a better place? I must have had about 10 or 12 or 15 people come up afterwards and say, nobody says that to us. But you're right. What we do is heroic. What we do helps people. And I often say that the NGOs work on this issue, but the banks have been doing this for a long time. You have to protect your business. By doing that, you find bad things and you report it and you address those things, and the world's a better place as a result of it. So when I was going to Hong Kong, I was often using that message to say to the private sector, feel good about what you're doing. Your role has an important part of basically ensuring that people don't get victimized. And you may not think it's relevant and important, but it certainly is.